Yes.
One by one,
Yes.
each lawman turned criminal
Yes.
heard chilling details of the crimes against them
Yes.
and stoically admitted their guilt in front of a judge.
Yes.
The so-called Rankin County Six, some of whom called themselves the Goon Squad,
Yes.
will now be forced to reckon with the decisions they made back in January, decisions they then hid from investigators and their own boss for months.
If you look at chronologically the way things went, there's really no way to fight the circumstances.
Attorney Trent Walker represents Michael Corey Jenkins and Eddie Parker, the two black men brutalized and assaulted that night. Walker says he thinks these officers' stories fell apart early on because of how former deputy.
Yes.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us here at Frank Talks. Breaking news has emerged from the state of Mississippi, where it is being reported that the Goon Squad, that's right, ladies and gentlemen, the Goon Squad has been sentenced. Let's get into it after this. Thank you for tuning in to Frank Talks this evening. As highlighted at the beginning of our broadcast, the breaking news simply that is being reported is that former law enforcement officers in Mississippi, 5 of whom were in the Rankin County Sheriff's Office's self-titled Goon Squad, they received sentences ranging from 15 to 45 years on Wednesday of last week for their confessed roles in a 90-minute, that's right, 90-minute torture session that included them assaulting 2 black men with a toy and punching and kicking them as they called them racial slurs. Now, one of the 6, Hunter Elward, forced his gun into the mouth of Michael Corey Jenkins, and he fired a round lacerating the man's tongue and breaking his jaw. It seems nothing less than a miracle that the victims, Jenkins in particular, survived and were able to convey their anguish to the court on Wednesday. Now, this is a quote from Michael, and it simply says, "They left me to die, bleeding on the floor, and they set me up to be in prison." That's what Jenkins said in a statement. And that because he still has trouble speaking, it was read Wednesday by his attorney. He said, and I quote, "Your Honor, they killed me. I just did not die. I cannot imagine." Eddie Parker, who was tortured alongside him that night, said, "I don't know if I'll ever be able to sleep again at night." He said that the humiliation and embarrassment from the assault is too great for me to talk about. Now, I think we have a bit more footage here that we want to share concerning this horrible and terrible incident that happened there in the state of Mississippi.
Tonight, 2 former Mississippi deputies sentenced to federal prison for torturing 2 black men last year. One sentenced for 20 years, the other for 17 and a half. Both members of a self-proclaimed 6-person goon squad, known in the area for their use of excessive force and aggressive tactics.
This is a message
to all racist police officers in every department in Mississippi and throughout the United States of America.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, as you saw from that video, the question then becomes, is this the current situation facing black men in 2024? Now, while discussions often revolve around the perceived feminization of black men in fashion and media portrayals, there seems to be a lack of what I would call attention on instances where black men have been subjected to abuse by those entrusted with their protection. Now, who should bear responsibility for such occurrences? It is reasonable to assert that accountability lies with the sheriff in charge if such misconduct took place under their jurisdiction while the officers were actually on duty. However, it is disconcerting that support seems to be extended to the sheriff despite conflicting claims. And the sheriff here is Sheriff Bryan Bailey. Now, the sheriff expressed astonishment upon discovering the presence of the goon squad. Criticism, of course, was directed at Sheriff Bryan Bailey for purportedly endorsing the violence that transpired during his tenure in Rankin County. Now, a call was made for his resignation or removal as the next plausible course of action. Now, John C. Barnett, a civil rights attorney, he's demanding the sheriff's resignation. He told the Mississippi Press after Wednesday's sentencing hearing, he said, and I quote, "We'd be fools to think Bailey didn't know anything about the goon squad," end quote. Now, has the sheriff, and this is my question to you that are watching, has the sheriff been playing white America for fools is the real question. Now, in my opinion, that is the real question indeed, as we recount this former claim which occurred a few years ago. Ladies and gentlemen, in 2014, Sheriff Bryan Bailey of Rankin County, Mississippi, issued what appeared to be routine requests to the local district attorney's office. Now, he sought grand jury subpoenas to compel the phone company, get this, to disclose call and text message records for an alleged confidential internal investigation. Now, despite Sheriff Bailey's claims, a recently uncovered report obtained by the New York Times and the Mississippi Center for Investigative Reporting at Mississippi Today revealed something quite contrary. And it was that his requests were not at all related to suspected misconduct or any criminal inquiry. Rather, Sheriff Bailey misused grand jury authority on at least 8 occasions within a year to surveil his married girlfriend and a school employee with whom she was reportedly involved in an extramarital relationship. Now, this investigative report, dated 2016 and compiled by the then district attorney, Michael Guest, sheds light on these concerning, what I would consider very concerning actions. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the evidence presented suggested that Sheriff Bailey had deceived the prosecutor's office, potentially infringing state laws on fraud, a felony punishable by up to 5 years of imprisonment. Now, Mr. Guest, presently a U.S. congressman and the chair of the House Committee on Ethics, opted not to proceed with the case due to conflicts of interest, notably his long-standing friendship with the sheriff. Now, he disclosed his findings to 2 local judges and forwarded his investigation to the state attorney general. And, ladies and gentlemen, that's where the matter ended. Now, prominent individuals in Mississippi such as the Attorney General, 2 judges, and a prospective congressman, became aware of this sheriff who deceived to monitor his girlfriend. A fact, ladies and gentlemen, again, they chose to conceal. Now, this behavior, in my humble opinion, exemplifies a pattern identified by the Times and Mississippi Today, illustrating how sheriffs in Mississippi can operate without consequence, exploiting their authority to manipulate the criminal justice system for personal gain. Now, despite facing grave accusations of misconduct, these sheriffs and this sheriff remains unchallenged and unaccountable. Now, we also might be fools if we think the sheriff will ever be held accountable for the atrocities that happened on his watch. Now, he'd already served as sheriff for 12 years and was reelected in November. That is almost 9 months after the U.S. Justice Department announced that it was investigating a possible civil rights violation by his department, and 3 months after 5 of his former deputies and the Richland police officer pleaded guilty to 16 federal charges, including civil rights, conspiracy, deprivation of rights under color of law, discharge of a firearm during a crime of violence, conspiracy to obstruct justice, and obstruction of justice. Bailey wasn't just re-elected, ladies and gentlemen, he was re-elected without opposition. You can't make this up. The only thing he says, and I quote, "I'm guilty of," is trusting grown men that swore an oath to do their job correctly. He said after his deputies pleaded guilty to these federal charges in August of 2023. He says, and I quote, "I'm guilty of that," end quote. However, about 4 months after that statement from Bailey, Mississippi Today, as part of a series by the New York Times Local Investigations, published a story based on interviews with more than 50 people who either experienced or witnessed the Goon Squad's torture. Now, many of the people interviewed, the news outlet reported, have filed formal complaints or lawsuits against the Goon Squad's officers. Sheriff Bailey may have fooled many. However, in this reporter's humble opinion, he has not fooled everyone. Roll the tape.
It's time to expose some lies, share some truth about the Rankin County Sheriff's Department Goon Squad, or Death Squad, or as they're known throughout the department as the Special Response Team. It's not when did Sheriff Bryan Bailey find out about the Special Response Team. It's about when did he stop knowing about it. Let's get this public information out to the public right here on Paul Holly's Facebook page from 2019. More about Paul Holly in just a minute. Here is the Special Response Team, the Goon Squad. Let's look here on the left side. Up there in the top left, here's Deputy Luke Stickman, and there is Hunter Elward. I now have multiple sources close to the situation that it was well known that Hunter Elward regularly beat the hell out of black men. Sources close to the situation also confirmed that he routinely said the N-word over and over. He was a well-known racist. Now, Luke Stickman and Hunter Elward are the 2 deputies that in 2021 went into Damian Cameron's house, beat, tased, kneeled on his neck until Damian Cameron repeatedly had been saying, "I can't breathe," and then finally said, "Mama, know that I love you." Those 2 need to be charged with murder. Hey, Luke, wondering how you missed out on the event in January. I'd love to hear from you if you want to get a hold of me. Holla. Now let's go over here to the right side. This in the far corner is Paul Holly. He's been seen next to the sheriff, and he's been the spokesperson often lately for trying to make the department sound good. He's a lawyer, speaks real nice. He's right next to Sheriff Bryan Bailey at these press conferences. Over here in the left top is Jeffrey Middleton, pled guilty, and down here in the bottom is Christian Dedman. Now, Christian Dedman is very close to Sheriff Bryan Bailey. Sheriff Bryan Bailey was a father figure to Christian Dedman, who was estranged from his family. Bryan Bailey and Christian Dedman were very, very close. Y'all, we got more news coming. We're putting together a lot of stuff. There's lots and lots of information about the Rankin County Sheriff's Department Special Response Team, Goon Squad, Death Squad. Yo, Dre, I've got something to say.
Never heard that. Nobody's ever reported that to me. And then in the court documents that I read today is the second time I've even seen Goon Squad. So, again, I'm just floored and shocked.
Now, again, Sheriff Bailey, how did you not know? This gentleman's account is not the only testimony on record. According to Mississippi Today, a small number of those interviewed, including a sheriff's deputy from a neighboring county, disclosed instances of direct communication with Bailey regarding the unit's aggressive behavior. Now, this particular deputy, who faced a 6-month incarceration and subsequent job loss, though never convicted, recounted to Mississippi Today that Bailey had accused him of misconduct and covertly recorded their conversation before, and he quoted, "he hung up on me." Ladies and gentlemen, we now come to the part of this report where I share my commentary. First, I must start with some questions to solicit your support in obtaining clarity to this subject matter. How did Bailey miss the challenge coins the Goon Squad had the audacity to create to celebrate itself? They even embossed those coins with the name of Middleton, the now imprisoned former lieutenant who led them. That's the question. Now, when Mississippi Today pointed out that several high-ranking deputies have been involved in arrests that has sparked accusations of brutal treatment, the outlet says he responded. He says, and I quote, "I have 240 employees. There's no way I can be with them each and every day," end quote. At the same press conference, he said the officers who attacked Jenkins and Parker had lied to him. Bailey said, again, I quote, "I'm going to stay here. I'm not going to resign. I'm going to fix these problems," end quote. And he said, "leave the department in better shape than I found it." Really? Really, Sheriff Bailey? Really, Mississippi? Is this the best that Mississippi has to offer? Now, though Jenkins and Parker are black, and all the officers who've been sentenced for assaulting them are white, Mississippi Today found that most of the people who've accused the Goon Squad of misconduct are not black, but they are white. Ladies and gentlemen, they are not black, they're white. But still, there's no way around the fact that they humiliated and tortured this black man because, as Jenkins put it Wednesday, we were accused of dating white women. It just so happens that, as the Associated Press reported, Parker was a childhood friend of the homeowner, Christy Wiley, who was at the hospital at the time. Now, she's been paralyzed since she was 15, and Parker was helping care for her. And she said, "I am pleased that these individuals she reported that he was taken care of. And I would say that I am pleased that these individuals are receiving the appropriate justice for the callous act that was perpetrated against them in the sentencing of the involved officers." However, my humble opinion, to solidify this outcome, many assert, as well as myself, that the sheriff's resignation is imperative to symbolize a significant shift in Mississippi. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the racial history of cities in Mississippi, as well as this state in its entirety, has long been a source of contention. Instances such as the tragic shooting of Benjamin Brown by the police in Jackson, Mississippi in May of 1967 serve as a stark reminder of this troubled past. Now, it would be found that Lloyd Jones, a state trooper, would be implicated in that shooting, which was very similar to this latest case that we're talking about right now involving law enforcement here, right now in 2024. In response, I urge the majority demographic, within that state to condemn such actions and those who perpetrate or condone them. And I urge, listen, ladies and gentlemen, hear me close. I urge white America to take a stand against individuals perpetuating the narrative that Mississippi will indefinitely remain one of the most racially segregated states in these United States. It is essential to recognize that not everyone condones such actions. And listen, those who oppose them must unite and speak against those who support them in both this city and in the state. Now, there's a very popular quote from Pastor Martin Niemöller that says, "First they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. But then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me." Ladies and gentlemen, Mississippi can no longer allow these images to plague the state. Now, I'm going to be honest because I am very pragmatic. I am a realist, and I'm going to be honest with you. Ladies and gentlemen, it will require more than a minority of individuals within the state to catalyze a transformation in Mississippi's troubled history concerning racial matters. Nevertheless, this change is imperative for the inhabitants of the state to embark on a journey of healing, introspection, connection, and subsequent reconstruction. Good night, and thank you for having this honest and frank talk.